Hey guys, my name is Nabil and today we'll be dealing with natural resources. Just to give some insight into what you'll need to know before you go more in depth into natural resources. But firstly, this venture was made possible by the Carbon Zero Initiative of Trinidad and Tobago, also known as CZIT, in collaboration with Worldcast Live and the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program. Right, let's get to it. Before we start natural resources, we have to understand that a resource on its own is anything that can be of use to us in any way. Natural resources, however, is more specific and focuses on the environment, where these resources are created and in some cases even restored by nature and can be both biotic and abiotic. Natural resources can also be renewable and non-renewable, where renewable resources are able to be constantly replenished throughout various natural cycles within the lifespan of a human being. Natural resources can be wind, water, and biomass from forests and mangroves as we have right here in Trinidad. Now pay close attention to that one because it's important when defining what a non-renewable resource is. While it is a natural resource, a non-renewable resource is that which are found in nature but are unable to be replenished throughout the lifetime of a human being. Things like coal, natural gas, oil, and other mineral ores fall into this category of non-renewable resources. Mineral ores, while similar to oil and gas in that it is produced naturally, it takes a long time for this to be replenished throughout the rock cycle. And just as a side note, animals can also be considered a natural resource, fitting both categories of renewable and non-renewable. I'll give you a few seconds to guess as to why this can be so. Well, with a bit of care, animals can reproduce, and some even in large numbers, taking note of the one criteria, which is to be replaced in a relatively short period of time, which could be a few years in this case. If this is the case, animals can be considered a renewable resource. However, on the other hand, due to poaching and overhunting of some animals, such as the white rhinos or even fishing in some cases, without the consideration for their reproductive rates, it could lead to the extinction, making them a non-renewable resource. Well, that kind of covers the gist of natural resources and what it is. But to get a better understanding of it and why it is important, you'll have to look into what man-made resources are and the impact these man-made resources would have on the existing natural resources. Man-made resources, as you could guess by the name, are any resources that could be useful to us and are made by human beings. As you could see, it includes machineries and roads, just to name a few. With this in mind, human beings since the dawn of industrialization around 1970 or so have been using the Earth's natural resources in all forms to aid in the development of modern societies and to advance the technologies that we use today. Just a little fun fact here, the world's economy uses approximately 60 billion tons of resources in all forms each year to produce goods and services that we all use today. On average, a person from Europe consumes approximately 36 kilograms of resources a day, whilst a person in Africa would consume just over 10 kilograms of resources per day. From this, you could assume that developed countries consume and utilize a lot more resources on a daily basis compared to a developing country. It is important to know that all these resources are being used, and from the information above clearly indicate that resources are in no way distributed evenly throughout the world. For example, in the United States, they account for one of the largest coal reserves in the world, having 27% or approximately 491 billion short tons. And in another area of the world, China accounts for one of the largest producers of gold. And now looking further into natural resources, you'll come across terms such as exhaustible and inexhaustible resources. Basically, these are other terms used to describe natural resources. With exhaustible resources, being non-renewable resources like coal and natural gas, and the inexhaustible resources being the renewable resources that we spoke about earlier, like the wind, water, and biomass, for example. Consumptive use of resources refer to the consumption of natural resources in any way. For example, cutting down forests to make furniture. And on the other hand, non-consumptive use of these natural resources refer to the indirect benefits a person could obtain from the use of natural resources, such as tourism or even the ecological functions of these natural resources, such as flood prevention or the filtration of water and any other ecological service that you can think of. Knowing all this now, do you think it's important to conserve these resources? And don't worry, I know it's getting a little long, but we're almost to the end. And to answer the previous question, I think it is important to conserve these resources. And that just begs the question, how would one conserve or go about conserving these resources? Firstly, to get to that point, you'd have to know what is really threatening or damaging the existence of these resources. Firstly, you have overpopulation, which can be seen as a single large threat to natural resources. For example, a child was born every 8 seconds in the United States alone before COVID-19. And an increase in population would increase the pressures on the natural resources. Secondly, land use. With more persons to feed and housing required, more land will be needed to be cultivated and to be developed for housing. More farming chemicals will be applied to increase food production, and many forests and vegetative lands will be converted to settlements for persons. These by itself would have serious repercussions, as in many cases, the regrowth period for these forests are not considered and would therefore damage the forest resources. Thirdly, with the increasing population, forests, which are a great natural resource, will be stressed as they will be forced to produce more than their capacity, as the demand for timber, food, or even when land has to be cleared for roads increased. Fresh water and seafood will face problems too, as we will continue to depend heavily on them. Overhunting and even overfishing will occur, neglecting the reproductive capacity of these organisms, potentially causing harm to the marine environment at large, as these fishing methods are in no way sustainable. This lack of sustainable practices can destroy much more fish and sea creatures in this process. And lastly, climate change. This, as you all should know by now, is the alteration of climate patterns as a result of the excessive release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This, along with all the other impacts which come with climate change, has the ability to hurt the biodiversity and many other abiotic as well as biotic natural resources. Species that have already acclimatized to the environment may perish, and others will have to move to more favorable conditions. I left this for last because it's something of utmost importance and something which you should pay particular attention to. I can also say this from personal experience that one of the sponsors for this video, CZIT, has done a lot in the area of research as well as education into climate change and the impacts. And finally, we have come close to the end. We're almost finished. Now that we know some of the threats which face the existing natural resources, we can now come up with some ways to save and protect these natural resources. With cities around the world being responsible for the consumption of over 75% of the natural resources present, and for the release of over 75% of carbon emissions, what can we do, or what can be done in general to conserve the remaining natural resources? Firstly, we have education and public awareness. All the stakeholders, which includes the citizens of the country, must aim to provide information and to raise public awareness about the wonders of natural resources and about its importance and why we must save and protect these natural resources. Secondly, governments and policy changes. This can be an initiative taken by governments and organizations in order to enforce policies within the business places and within the country that protect the environment. A good example, or a few examples of this, would be the Cartagena Convention and the Ramsar Convention, which both go towards the protection of the marine environment and wetlands. And these are just two simple ways in which we can conserve the natural resources. I'll leave it open for you guys to come up with some more in this area. It is important to know that everyone in some way or the other could have some impact on the natural resources present around us, and it's really up to us to determine whether that impact is either positive or negative. In concluding, natural resources are proven to be necessary in order to sustain life on Earth. Even though they are distributed unevenly throughout, cooperation between countries and even individuals within a country is needed to protect and conserve these natural resources. The proper use of natural resources, both the renewable and non-renewable, is important for the sustainable development of a country. And as we are coming to the end, you can pause this video and use both the reference materials as well as what you've learned for the past few minutes to answer the questions that follow. Good luck and thanks for watching.